Thank you all for being here, and thank you to my two great guests. So I don't think they need any introduction, but still, we will say a few words about Donald Trump Jr. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
In your own capacity, as a partner of 1789. You will tell us why you picked that name later on, which, by the way, where he leads investment strategy, capital development, and of course, Don, you serve as an executive vice president at the Trump Organization, which oversees real estate project, and you sit, my God, you have too many jobs, huh? On the board of Trump Media and Technology Group and Public Square Holdings. So graduated from Wharton School. As you know, he's a business leader and very, very active on how to transform United States of America from a private, I would say, angle. Omeed Malik is the co-founder, of course, and the president of 1789, the founder and CEO of Farvar Partners. He had led multiple public and private investment ventures coming from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, corporate law. So he served also on the board of Fannie Mae, and he's recognized for definitely his leadership, I can tell, because I have the privilege to spend some time with Omeed, and my God, he doesn't stop. They created a private club in Washington, which in a few days became the place to be, guys. So we have a quite provocative thematic today, which is how patriotic capitalism is challenging the status quo. So Omeed, let me start with you. You are the architect about this notion of patriotic capitalism. Can you tell us more about why, and at the same time, why 1789?
Yeah, so I'll start with why we think patriotic capitalism was a phrase that I think in the old days would have been redundant, but is something that I had to coin a few years ago during the dark days of the Biden administration. And that was because our country was losing its way over several decades, but culminating with the period between 2020 and 2024, because not only had capital become weaponized, but even the private sector was behaving in a way that seemed, I think, somewhat irrational. ESG policies that began in 2010 started really trying to change customer behavior, and we stopped putting shareholder value as the primary focus, which is against all jurisprudence and corporate law in America since its inception. So that was the backdrop, and then ultimately you also look at a country that had outsourced its supply chains, didn't have control of them, we were not making things, and COVID brought that to light. You know, you have this virus that came, but we weren't able to take any strong actions against China because everything we needed was made over there. So it was a great wake-up call. And it was with that, coupled with the censorship that we were seeing at that period of time, using large private actors to take away our First Amendment rights, that Don and I, who have been friends for a long time, came together and said, we need to do something about it. Not necessarily in government, but outside of government. Let's use the private sector to re-industrialize the United States. So now you have a lot of people using these phrases, but he and I were doing it before it was popular. We were about 4 years early, and we started using various mechanisms to try to effectuate that. We took companies public via SPACs, but ultimately it culminated in an asset manager that we called 1789 Capital to invest in the companies that were going to enhance the security and prosperity of the United States. And the reason why we use that, 1789 is the year the Bill of Rights was introduced in the United States. And for us, we saw a real synthesis between politics, right, and finance. And nothing better than us protecting those rights, even in the private sector where they were being curtailed.
Don, what Omeed just defined for you, is it a rejection of globalization or an evolution toward, I would say, self-reliance and national resilience?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think we've seen what's happened over the last few years. We went through it ourselves. We were persecuted. We were prosecuted. They tried throwing us in jail, myself included, because we spoke out against that global establishment and the establishment within the United States. I think what we did differently was, rather than just sort of take defeat, go crawl up in a ball in a corner and die, we actually fought back. We had one of the great platforms of the world to speak out. We had the balance sheet to be able to do that. We had the sort of financial ingenuity to be able to do these things, whether that was just fighting back and creating a social media platform to combat what was taken away from us on the free speech front. We did that with True Social. When we woke up one morning and we lost 300 bank accounts overnight at the Trump Organization, couldn't make payroll for a restaurant worker. It had nothing to do with politics. They were trying to shut us down at all costs. We got into crypto. We got with the best minds, and we started taking on those norms. So what Omeed and I really started here was doing that. We did the things that were unpopular at the time, that couldn't get banked, but they always made sense. These were great businesses. These were things that were norms for America. And so we wanted to make sure that those people had that same voice, that ability to fight back. Now, a few years later, all of a sudden, it seems like a brilliant idea, but when we were doing it, it was borderline a jailable offense, even though there was nothing wrong with it. So we took a contrarian approach, and it's paid off. And I think what that's done is really given us the credibility with so many people, whether it's our portfolio companies or otherwise, that we'll be there even if the political winds change. Everyone else is going out there feeling the air. You know, they're really against something until they can profit for it, then they're for it for a few weeks, until it changes again, and then they're gone. I think what we've shown is an incredible resilience and consistency to fight for the things that we believe in.
You're not obliged to answer to my next question, but when I hear you, I want to ask you a personal question. Where do you find your family, this energy to be resilient and to fight against everything that you just described? You say we're almost going to jail.
Well, I guess it's a combination of genes and maybe a masochistic tendencies. I'm not sure, you know, but it was interesting. You say it, it's an interesting point. I mean, for me, my whole life, I was a real estate guy. I did deals all over the world, Jerry, you know that all too well. It's what we did. Then one day we woke up and we weren't able to do this. We got our bank account shut down, and even in getting into the political space, how vicious that was. I mean, I think everyone understands that the whole Russia nonsense that was going on for 5 years, many are still talking about it, was always nonsense. It didn't matter, but it wasn't going to stop them from making me do 50 hours of congressional testimony for treason. Just so we're clear, that's a crime punishable by death. Now, I understand that I am not the upstanding citizen that Hunter Biden is, I know. But it feels a little different. I was a business guy, and I guess I woke up one day and I was like, we have no choice. We can run or we can fight, and we chose to fight.
Omeed, in which industries, in which sectors, in which companies are you investing now?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this began as something that was principal, but from a financial perspective, it was an arbitrage opportunity. So in other words, why were investment firms intentionally not investing in fossil fuels, free speech, guns? These were all things that we either had a First Amendment or Second Amendment protection for, or were very lucrative, but people didn't want to invest in them. So it began that way, but even things like defense tech, we were investing in defense tech 3 or 4 years ago, and no one was touching that because we had a mentality in Silicon Valley that, well, we're happy to do business in China and raise money from China, but we're not going to support the US government. This is the kind of stupidity that we stepped into to fill the void. So primarily right now what the fund is very, very long is defense tech and obviously AI, because that is the future. So we're very, very overweight in artificial intelligence and defense tech.
Are the company you are investing in known or visible? Or?
Yeah, very well known. For example, someone that's very well known to the world is Elon Musk. We're invested in his entire portfolio, SpaceX, XAI, Neuralink, but other names that might not be as obvious in defense tech, Anduril, Hadrian. But we also, as I said, always look through a prism of how we can benefit the United States. We're investing in private companies that are going to do rare earth mining in the United States. China controls 90% of that. That's a huge issue for the US. We want to complement all the great work that the Trump administration is doing within the private sector. Another huge issue, as I mentioned, is the battle for AI. DeepSeek out of China caught all of us off guard. So what's a huge investment we just made is we decided to back the only open source of note model in the United States called Reflection AI, and we did that with NVIDIA just about a month ago. So these are the big, big deals that 1789 is leading, and portfolio companies that want to also support the United States want us on their cap table. So that's the kind of stuff we're into.
Don, why, we have plenty of investors here in the room watching, why an investor should join you or partner with 1789?
Well, again, I think it's the consistency in messaging. We're going to be there. We got onto we're on these cap tables. Again, these are companies that were largely funded by Democrats for their entire lives. They understood that we were about freedom, that we were about free speech. We can have those disagreements. We can have them out there in the open. We weren't going to cut someone off because of a slight disagreement on politics. And I think what we saw, that transition for so many in tech, that basically created the modern-day Democrat Party over the last few decades. Well, the second that tech actually was perhaps a threat to the Democrat power and the hegemony that they had in Washington, all of a sudden they got nothing, and they woke up one day going to the friends that they created and said, we need this. We're not going to do that. And so they realized that our side, our party, was that side of freedom, of liberty. And so for us, that consistency in messaging, going out there, we understand we're outside of government, obviously, but over the last 10 years, we've been embroiled in it. We've been in that fight. We understand what the administration wants to do because we help craft some of that messaging. So we can be on the outside, but still have that understanding of what they plan to do, and that's logical. When you look at what's going on, I mean, one of the first stops was right here. You know, $2 trillion in foreign direct investment, eight since the start of the administration. If you just straight line that over 10 years, that's 2% annual GDP growth on top of what we already have. You add in the $330 billion from tariff revenues, another point of GDP across the board. I mean, America is an incredible place, and we've been, like I said, very steadfast and loyal in our investment
GDP will double, correct?
So that's what I'm saying. So if you really listen to what he said, it's probably the most important backdrop you could offer from a macroeconomic perspective, which is what he's suggesting is that we're going to double GDP growth. So that would then obviously suggest that you're going to double what you're seeing in the market.
This is
so
massive,
massive thing. So the math is there. 8 to 9 trillion pledged from foreign direct investment, as he said. The tariffs, by the way, worked. There was no inflation associated with it. You're bringing down the deficit, which further reduces borrowing costs as well. At the same time, you installed the permanent tax cut, and you sealed the border so we don't just let people come in willy-nilly, which depresses wages. And you deregulate, and you unleash energy. You put all those together, we're entering an economic super cycle in the United States, and we're the most innovative company in the world. There is no doubt that people should be investing in the US, and if they like, maybe call us at 1789 as well.
We had many conversations on something which is very close to my heart as an engineer by background, which is to rebuild the industrial power of the United States of America. Can you tell us more about that? Because the IMF is forecasting a 7% rise in domestic manufacturing investment next year. Mm-hmm. So what will be your contribution? How do you see that happening? And do you think that this reindustrialization of the United States is a strategic protectionism or a new era, the new America?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think we have to do that. We've probably learned in America that getting your doctoral degree in gender studies is probably not a viable option for the future. So bringing back advanced manufacturing while creating blue-collar jobs for Americans is actually a no-brainer. Not only does it create incredible jobs for people who can actually earn a living, not be in debt to a college with a job that could never possibly pay back that student loan, not forcing a plumber to pay back the loans of the alleged elite that seem to not be able to take care of themselves. But you're creating a stability, and then having that manufacturing base there also shores up the supply chains that we've seen are totally at risk. We saw that during COVID. We see that today as it relates to the rare earth minerals. So this is just fundamentally critical for America. I think the great lesson, not of the Trump administration, number one, but really of the Biden administration, was just how fragile our economy is, and more importantly, how fragile the world is. If you have weak leadership coming from America, if they're hamstrung by the inability to actually compete, to not have those supply chains stabilized, the entire world goes to hell in a handbasket very quickly. We saw that with the outbreak of wars all over the place. We saw that with the economic decline. We saw that with increased rates of poverty. It was a total disaster. Perhaps, and I hate to say this as a Trump, but perhaps those 4 years of the Biden administration was not only what America needed, but what the world needed to understand really what's at stake. And so I think bringing all of that back to the United States, growing that up, and then working with our partners around the world, allies around the world with a similar mindset to help grow that similar base and stop the stranglehold from China is probably one of the most fundamental things we can do as a world together. So we're very excited about that opportunity. I mean, I think it's just the beginning of that age in America. Unfortunately, we live in a 24-hour news cycle that, my father, not being a politician, he's actually one of the few guys in America playing that long game, understanding that just because you do something today doesn't mean it's enacted tomorrow and you're gonna see those results. He's playing that long game that we all need to be playing as nations around the world.
And how are you able, guys, to convince the young generation that this is the right strategy? Because, many youth in America, they think very global. They don't really understand this notion of patriotic capitalism. So how do you deal with this young generation, what we call the Gen Z?
Well, I'll answer just something about that in a second, and then I want you to answer it because you were on the ground and you saw that actually you're doing very well with young people, right? So we actually have a lot of hope for Gen Z. So I want to hear about your experience on the campaign trail. But What I would just say is what I think we also are personifications of is a generational shift in the United States. So with all due respect to baby boomers, they've been in power since 1992. So Bill Clinton was younger than Joe Biden, which is horrifying actually, but that was the fact. And so we're both Gen X. And I think what you're going to see now is a different generation taking power in the United States, and obviously in this region too. And that's also exciting because we can focus a lot of time on the young people who are in their teens or early 20s, but what's the generation that's actually leading the country? And I see a generational shift happening in the United States also of who's going to take power in the private sector and the public sector. And I'm also very excited about that. And that's not something that I think is mentioned enough, which is the baby boomers finally passing power. You know, we have so many 85-year-olds in the Senate and the House that have been running the country for 40 years. I'm excited to see the torch being passed on that front. And then maybe for the younger people, you can address that.
Yeah, listen, I think the entire premise would have been 100% right until a few years ago. I mean, if we were going to get someone, I don't know when you say even Republican or Democrat, but basically America first. Well, you get them at 35 when they realize they're paying too much in taxes for things that they're getting absolutely no benefit of. It's been very different. Charlie Kirk was one of my closest friends in the world. You know, I basically discovered him at 19, 20 years old, brought him on, you know, in 2015 on the first Trump campaign, and I helped him, you know, every day, you know, build Turning Point USA. When you look at what happened in this last election cycle, you had the greatest swing of sort of that millennial voter towards America First policies. So much so that, frankly, they killed him for it. The fact that he opened up his mic, one of the greatest platforms, one of the largest platforms anywhere in the world, every day to his biggest detractors, let them make their point, and then gave them back facts. People saw that. That young generation saw that. They don't want to grow up in their mom's basement. They want to be able to start a family. They want to be able to afford housing. And under the existing policies in America during the Biden administration and the disastrous policies of immigration first under the Democrats, that was never going to happen because they would be working their entire lives to subsidize someone else who was never contributing to the system. It didn't work. So the shift of patriotism in America to being actually America first has never been greater. I think that momentum is going to continue, especially once they start seeing that these policies are actually working. Now, we're never working on a fair playing field, right? You have a mainstream media complex. You still have a large, you know, the big tech in the sense of social media is still very biased towards the left. You know, that's always a factor, but people are starting to see these things with their own eyes. These wins are bringing those people even further and further to our party. Once they start getting involved in the political process and you, again, start displacing, you know, some 85-year-old senator who has no connection to the people they're actually chosen to represent, it's a big deal. You actually saw that during the, you know, the No Kings protest, which was sort of ironic because I guess if my father was a king, he probably wouldn't allow those protests to happen, and maybe the government would actually be open. But maybe he's a great president, but a terrible king, apparently. But you saw the people that were actually protesting. It's the same crazy liberals from the 60s and 70s. They're just a lot older and fatter. It wasn't young people with jobs. It was the same hippies that basically have been bored that they haven't done anything with their lives and they haven't had a chance to protest in 40 years. They're doing it. It's not an organic movement. It's entirely manufactured, paid for by the usual, you know, puppets around the world and their NGOs. Everyone sees it. That's why it has no efficacy. It's why when my father mocks them to their face on social media, I can't believe it. We're criticizing him, and he's mocking us in public. It's like, yeah, because no one's taking you seriously. Everyone sees through it. What's been great about, again, the last few years is that entire veil has been lifted. People no longer believe what they read. They understand that the narrative is entirely created, and now they're rebelling against that, and that's the greatest thing that can happen.
Is it one of the main reasons why both of you who are coming from privileged and influential families decided to, I would say, challenge and shake up the establishment?
I mean, I guess we're class traitors in that respect, which is a badge I wear proudly. We're both living in New York City for the majority of our lives, and we escaped the People's Republic and became political refugees to the free state of Florida in the year 2021, escaping some of the draconian policies I was alluding to earlier around COVID, but which was also, I think, a precursor to what you're seeing now. The nice thing about the United States is that you see it's a lab in a way. That's what federalism is all about. And you start to see failed models in New York and California. They have the highest taxes. They also have the highest deficits. They can't keep their citizens safe. They don't have good education. And so when you look at all of that, and then you look at a place like Florida or Texas that has no income tax in their state, yet they run surpluses, you start to ask, like, okay, people don't have to live this way. And so what I hope is that that competition is going to create better outcomes, where we're originally from. It doesn't look like that way in New York. I think they have to hit rock bottom before they change, it seems like. But, for what we've done is I think we are fundamentally, as we started the conversation, people who are extremely patriotic about this country for different reasons in the United States. For my personal narrative, both my parents were immigrants, and they came to the country and created a story that could only happen in the United States, nowhere else in the world. And as a result of that, I found it odd how people would criticize America the way they were during the period I was referencing. That doesn't resonate with people like me. If you're a first-generation American and the country has given you so much, you should love that country. And I have experiences with my mom who was born in Iran where a country shifted very quickly. You have to be very careful about a country because you can lose it if you don't try to preserve it. And so that's what motivates me from a personal standpoint.
And is 1789 the continuation of what your father says, which America first?
I think very much so. Again, it can't just happen in government. To sort of the last question, my father may have been in that elite class, and yet there was a reason he was able to resonate with real Americans. Authenticity is everything in politics. He was able to resonate with those guys because in reality, he wasn't just a guy in the glitz and glam, cover of magazines. He was a builder. He was a better builder than most because he actually spent time with the workers who were actually building those projects. He didn't listen to the guy in the gilded office on a spreadsheet who wasn't actually on the ground. He spent time on the construction site. So for his entire career, while you look at him as this guy, the brash billionaire from New York, he was that way, but he also learned from the guys on the ground. He respected them, he treated them as equals. And so when he got into this thing, how is this man able to communicate with his people? It's like, well, he spent more time with them than anyone. No one knew them better. And so he was able to get that message across. So what we also discovered, we can't just change things in the political spectrum. We actually have to do that in the private sector as well. Without both of those things aligning, eventually the machine just takes over, you end up where you are. What we want is a generational shift towards these America First policies, both in government and in the private sector, to unleash the freedom and prosperity that all Americans deserve.
Your father came a few times in this country.
Yeah.
You, Omeed, also. It's your first time, Don.
First time.
After 48 hours, what is your first impression of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia?
It's actually incredible, and we've been having this, this talk amongst ourselves for so long. I mean, I'm the son of a European immigrant. My mother escaped communist Czechoslovakia during the 70s because she happened to be she was a great athlete. She was an Olympian, and so she got out of communist Czechoslovakia. And part of my upbringing was she sent me there every summer as a child. So during the early 80s, I spoke the language fluently, and I spent my summers in communist Czechoslovakia. It was an interesting juxtaposition to the life that I had lived, on the 70th floor of Trump Tower overlooking Central Park. But it was a fundamental thing for me to be able to see those differences. And so when I come here and I see what's going on, and I compare that to even Western Europe, I'm saying, who would have thought 20 years ago that anyone with a few brain cells would be investing in the Middle East versus anywhere in Europe? I mean, you would have said impossible. And yet now, if you look at the people in this room, if you look at the collection of people that His Excellency and Yasser and yourself have put together here versus anything in Europe, again, maybe other than maybe a couple of the globalist, gatherings, it's incredible. So I think the opportunity over here in the region is spectacular. I think those opportunities to partner with American companies, both to inward invest in America, what we do, but also for a lot of those companies to take advantage of the benefits that are offered here, I think is truly incredible. And again, it's going to be the number one thing to prevent the stranglehold of what we've seen China attempting to do over the last few decades.
Yeah, I mean,
if we meet again here in 5 years, what will success looks like for you, 1789, and for you guys personally?
well, just at a high level, I'll answer it within the context of your last question, which is like America first sometimes gets negative connotations. It just means it's another synonym for common sense. Shouldn't a leader of a country put their country first? Shouldn't it be Saudi Arabia first when you're in Saudi Arabia? That is like an argument that I think was put forth first in Westphalia, which the concept of a nation state occurred. And we lost that because we had globalization take over as a mentality, and people stopped caring about, in the Western world, whether it was Western Europe or the United States, about their middle class, about the people that they have a duty to. And they started saying, oh, we're lifting so many people out of poverty. What does a construction worker that used to work for your dad in the United States care about the fact that we created a middle class in China and created an enemy? So what we want to do going forward, and I think it's the vision that his father's put forth, and it is symbolic that his first visit abroad was here, Qatar, and the Emirates. That shows the change that you're describing, which is the future and how successful Saudi Arabia has been, showing that there is another path. And the United States needs to re-energize, re-industrialize, and again, start working for its own citizens again. That's what we care about. We care about our country and our people, and what we're trying to do in a small way is enhance the security and prosperity of its citizens in the private sector. And again, you can't do that without having infrastructure and energy. And these are all things we have and need to re-energize the United States. And so if I come back here in 5 years, I hope that the United States has done those things, and I hope that Saudi Arabia continues on the path that it's on, because you see what you've been able to do over 9 years here. It's remarkable. So I want to congratulate you and everybody for what you've accomplished.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think Omeed touched on it well. I think, if we can do something in the next 5 years, it's how about we make common sense common again. It was great to see, it was different. When my father came here, unlike the last presidents who visited here, it wasn't an apology tour. It was, how do we work together? How do we grow our respective economies? How do we create peace and stability in the region? That's a very different mentality. So there could be an America first component to that, but there can also be a Saudi first component to that, and everyone can actually benefit. So, that was the idea. Being able to collectively work together for the benefit of all of our collective nations is actually incredible, but it's also so basic that it's hard to believe that that's been forgotten for so long. America was, perhaps the worst example of that, where it felt like we were literally doing everything possible to build up everyone around us. Send every business elsewhere, offshore everything. To what end? It never made any sense. So I guess if we can drive home that point, that these things need to be common, they should not be frowned upon, you should not be politically persecuted for, again, doing what's right for your country. At what point in world history could a civilization ever survive without putting their own people first? It doesn't make sense. Every time you get on a plane, if the plane's going down, put on your mask before helping those around you, right? Doesn't mean you don't help those around you. It means you can't do that until you're actually able to take care of yourselves. A strong America is going to be great for the world. It's going to allow prosperity and peace to thrive, and that would be something that was nice. I remember when my father was criticized, even during the campaign, when he was asked about the Ukraine war, what would you like? Honestly, I'd like to see all the death to stop. How dare you? I mean, isn't that logical? Isn't that common sense? And yet he was criticized for it because I guess there's no money in peace, so they want the work to continue. He's a contrarian. He's going to do what's right for the world and what's right for America, and it's exciting to see that. We're going to do the same thing on the business front.
My last question. We spoke a lot about technology, about tech, investment, but recently you decided to launch something in a sector which we love in this part of the world, real estate. Can you tell us more about why suddenly you decided to create a big fund on real estate?
Well, it's actually part of a broader vision. So 1789 will be a multi-strategy asset manager. And we have the growth equity fund, we have a small situations fund, and the next thing we were going to do is real estate. And actually, it's very logical. There's two components at play that I think you'll appreciate. One is certainly a macro or political assessment of the situation that I referenced earlier, which is there will continue to be mass migration from the Northeast to the Sun Belt, including Florida, and we want to be able to have a real estate development fund that's going to take advantage of that migration, as well as the fact that a lot of the Sun Belt has not been zoned or built properly. That's a huge opportunity in that area. A lot of people in the real estate business are too overweight Chicago, LA, and New York, which are on the decline. So that's one from a business opportunity. The other is if you think about all the things we're investing in, all the innovation, all the AI, all the tech, you can't do that without infrastructure. And so the other aspect that's very synergistic with our portfolio is making sure that you can do those data centers, the hyperscalers. And that's a thing that we're going to invest in our own portfolio and providing that.
And you have a good expert on real estate.
I think he knows a thing or two about that.
Yeah, I'm a Trump. We had to bring it back down to real estate no matter what. I mean, even my father rebuilding and reshaping and improving the White House. I know it's created a great controversy, but I think no one can do it better. So I think in my world, it's hard to not bring everything back to real estate. But We're excited about the
Back
opportunities.
to the roots, including the new ballroom at the White House, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, please a round of applause for Omeed Malik and Donald Trump Jr.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.